Hello everybody, Shrouded Hand here. The case of Herbert Mullin combines two of my favourite subjects, serial killing and schizophrenia. I've covered some schizophrenic killers on this channel before, people like Richard Chase, but one thing I want to avoid is painting all schizophrenics as potentially dangerous killers. Obviously it's a very complex mental disorder and these kinds of crimes are the exception rather than the rule. However, if you wanted a stereotypical image of a schizophrenic maniac hearing voices in their head commanding them to kill, then Herb Mullin is your man. Born April 18th, 1947 in California. As with a lot of schizophrenic cases, his symptoms didn't manifest in childhood. He was a gifted kid who achieved good grades in school and was a popular, confident boy. Something seemed to trigger within him shortly after he graduated high school. His close friend Dean Richardson was killed in a car accident and Herb didn't handle it very well. In his bedroom, Herbert built a strange shrine to Dean Richardson, sticking photos of him on the wall and arranging the furniture around it. He became obsessed with Eastern mysticism and ideas of reincarnation. He also developed a preoccupation with impending natural disasters and how it might be possible to stop them. It was also around this time that he discovered LSD, regularly taking it in large doses along with cannabis. This most likely fueled his paranoid obsessions. His behaviour began to change. He became withdrawn and secretive. He sometimes had violent outbursts that alarmed his family members. One day in 1969, he suddenly displayed a bizarre new behaviour. The family were sat at the table having dinner when Herbert began to copy every action that his brother-in-law made. This is known as echopraxia, the involuntary mimicry of someone else's actions. It can be a symptom of schizophrenia, although other conditions like Tourette's syndrome and autism can cause echopraxia too. Either way, his family was so disturbed by his behaviour that they committed him to a mental institution, and there he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Over the following years, Herbert Mullin would find himself in a cycle, going in and out of various institutions. He would be admitted to a hospital, displaying bizarre new behaviours and paranoid delusions. A few weeks later he would be considered recovered enough to be released, only to be readmitted months later when the symptoms resurfaced. When he was in these institutions, he would write letters to strangers. He signed these letters, "A Human Sacrifice, Herb Mullin." Perhaps these letters were a warning sign of what Herb would go on to do in the future. Outside of the institutions, his behaviour was strange. One report says that he would water his welcome mat every morning as if it was a plant. He got kicked out of one apartment for incessantly pounding on the floor, shouting at people who weren't really there. In 1972, aged 24, he moved back in with his parents. His current obsession was earthquakes. His birthday had been on the 41st anniversary of the San Francisco earthquake of 1906, and for him this had a special significance. He started to hear voices in his head, including the voice of his father. The voices told him that a large earthquake was going to hit California. They also told him that he could prevent this earthquake. All he needed to do was kill people. He called these messages die songs. It was around this time that he met a man named Alan Hansen. Alan also had an interest in Eastern mysticism, and he confirmed Herb's beliefs about reincarnation. He also told Herb that the voices in his head were not delusions, but telepathic messages. He told him that he had been chosen by God to do something special. Perhaps without this encouragement, he wouldn't have gone on to do what he did. On October 13th, 1972, Herb Mullin was driving along the road in the Santa Cruz Mountains when he spotted a homeless man named Lawrence White hitchhiking. Mullin believed that the man was psychically communicating with him. Telepathically, Lawrence claimed to be Jonah from the Bible. Psychically, he said to Herb, "Pick me up and throw me over the boat. Kill me so that others will be saved. Herb now knew what his mission was. In order to stop the impending earthquake, he would need to kill Lawrence White. He stopped the car and lifted the hood, telling Lawrence that he was having engine trouble. As Lawrence stooped to examine the engine, Herb Mullin clubbed him over the head with a baseball bat and then battered him to death. The corpse of a dead homeless man didn't raise much interest with the police, and as there were no witnesses to the murder, Herb Mullin got away scot-free. 11 days later, he picked up another hitchhiker. This time it was Mary Guilfoyle, a student at Cabrillo College who was running late for an interview. Presumably following the instructions of some other telepathic message, Herb Mullin stabbed Mary to death. He then slit open her abdomen with a hunting knife and scattered her internal organs along the side of the road. Her body would remain undiscovered until February the following year. On November the 2nd, Mullin went to St. Mary's Catholic Church and confessed his crimes to the Reverend Henry Tomei. Once he had finished his confession, Herb claims he saw a light above the booth and heard a voice saying, "That's the person to kill." He pulled out his hunting knife, dragged the priest from the booth and stabbed him to death right there in the church. There was one witness, a parishioner who ran away when Herb started to attack the priest. Their description of a tall man in dark clothes didn't help the police much, and so Herb got away again without arousing suspicion. It should also be noted that around this time, the serial killer Ed Kemper was operating in the same area, and so police resources were tied up tracking him down. Any additional murders were most likely attributed to him. It probably didn't occur to the police that there were two serial killers operating at the same time. In December, Mullin read the book Einstein on Peace. As well as his birthday being the anniversary of a massive earthquake, Mullin also shared his birthday with Einstein, and he thought this was significant. After reading the book, he decided to buy a hunting rifle for protection. On January 19th, sick of his increasingly strange behaviour, his parents told him to move out, and so he moved into a dilapidated apartment of his own. This gave him more time to sit and stew on his life and think about where things had gone wrong for him. He decided that his problems all stemmed from his drug use, and the person responsible for this was James Gianera, the man who had first introduced Mullin to cannabis all those years ago. Mullin decided that James was involved in a conspiracy to ruin his life, and he needed to die. He went to the place where he thought James lived, but he found it had a new occupant, Kathy Francis. Kathy told Mullin that James Gianera had moved away and gave him his new address. Herb drove to this new address and gained entry to the house. Once inside, he shot James and his wife Joan in the head. Once they were dead, he stabbed their corpses repeatedly with his hunting knife. Afterwards, worrying that Kathy Francis might reveal his identity to the police, he drove back to her house and shot her and her two sons in the head. Kathy's husband, who was away at the time, was a known drug dealer, and so the murder of her and her sons, along with her friends James and Joan, were assumed to have been part of a gang-related hit, and once again Herb Mullin escaped suspicion. A month later, Herb was taking a walk through the Henry Cowell Redwood State Park. There he encountered a group of 4 teenage boys camping illegally at a spot named the Garden of Eden. He told the boys that he was a park ranger and he asked them to leave, saying that they were polluting Mother Earth, but they refused. At the same time, he telepathically asked the boys if he could kill them, and telepathically they said yes he could. He then drew his rifle and shot each one of them dead as they sat helpless in their tent. One of the bodies was found desperately trying to claw their way out of the side of the tent as they were being shot. It seems they didn't have a quick death. The bodies wouldn't be found until a week later, but by this point Mullin had killed again. On February the 13th, Herb was driving along Garkey Street in Santa Cruz. He was delivering firewood to his parents' home at the time. Suddenly he heard the voice of his father call out, "Don't you dare deliver a stick of wood unless you've killed somebody." He spotted a suitable victim, Fred Perez, a retired fisherman who was weeding his front yard. Herb Mullin stopped his car and got out. He carefully laid his rifle over the hood of his car, took aim and shot Fred through the heart, killing him instantly. This all happened in broad daylight, and multiple witnesses got Herb's license plates before he drove away. He was apprehended by police that very same day, giving himself up calmly when stopped at an intersection. Upon searching his apartment, police found newspaper clippings related to the murders, as well as a pouch of rosary beads belonging to Father Henry Tomei. During questioning, he told the police about his mission and how he had stopped natural disasters from occurring by murdering people. As proof of his efforts, there had been no earthquakes in the area the whole time he had been killing people. Strangely enough, 8 days after his arrest, California was hit by a 5.8 magnitude earthquake, and this further fueled Herb's belief that he had been on a mission from God. A transcript of part of his interview reveals his mental state at the time. When asked about the murders, he said, "We human beings, through the history of the world, have protected our continent from cataclysms by murder. In other words, a minor natural disaster avoids a major natural disaster. You see, the thing is, people get together, say in the White House. People like to sing the die song, you know. People like to sing the die song. If I am president of my class when I graduate from high school, I can tell 2, possibly 3 young male Homo sapiens to die. I can sing that song to them, and they'll have to kill themselves or be killed. An automobile accident, a knifing, a gunshot wound. You ask me why this is, and I say, well, they have to do that in order to protect the ground from an earthquake, because all of the other people in the community have been dying all year long. And my class, we have to chip in, so to speak, to the darkness. We have to die also, and people would rather sing the die song than murder." Mullin was clearly mentally ill. At the trial he confessed to the killings, but claimed diminished responsibility for reasons of insanity. The problem was the murder of Kathy Francis and her sons. This was done purely to cover his tracks, not because of some altruistic delusion that he was stopping earthquakes. He'd also done other things to cover his crimes, like filing down the serial number on his gun. This proved to the court that, although he was clearly mentally ill, he knew that what he was doing was wrong, and that he had the mental acuity to obey or disobey the voices in his head. For this reason, he was found guilty of first and second degree murder, and instead of being committed to a mental asylum, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Herb Mullin is up for parole in 2025, but it's unlikely that he'll get released. It's possible that he could be transferred to a mental institution rather than a prison. There's a campaign to do just that. Today, Herb Mullin has his own website that contains his writings and artwork. He expresses remorse for the killings and recognises that he was in a grip of a schizophrenic delusion at the time. A lot of the writing on there just sounds like the typical ravings you'd expect from someone who's seriously mentally unwell, but it's interesting to look through nonetheless. I'll put a link to his site in the description if you want to have a look for yourself. As for who's ultimately responsible for these crimes, well, I've never heard a voice in my head commanding me to kill, so I've no idea how easy it would be to disobey such a voice. Apparently Mullin said once he started to hear the robotic voice of his father, he found himself powerless to disobey. Around the time that Mullin began to show signs of schizophrenia, there were large cuts to mental health service budgets. Perhaps if he'd received better care, things might have turned out differently. Then again, it's quite easy to blame society or the government, but Mullin's actions showed that he knew what he was doing and made efforts to ensure that he wouldn't be caught. So what do you think? Is Herb Mullin a monster, or simply a victim of circumstance? Maybe he's somewhere in between. As with most things concerning mental health, it's never a black and white issue. There's always some grey area. Thank you for watching the video, and if you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. As usual, I want to say a huge thanks to everyone supporting the channel on Patreon and PayPal. Thank you very much to all of you. I'm overwhelmed by everyone's generosity. Thank you. If you'd also like to support the channel, then check out the link on screen now. Thanks for stopping by, and until next time, goodbye.